struggling to connect.
Yeah, I'm on OK.
Yeah, it has, but I've already pressed restart.
We want one more minute, buddy.
Where's that lad? Where's Gary Birches? Is he there?
He came to the planning meeting, Christian, and he put his stuff down there. And then Gary Birchett turned up, put his stuff there, and he went out, came back and said, oh, I can't see him sitting over there. So he moved his stuff to there. Gary Birchett came there, he was an element. Oh, money.
We'll make a start to the meeting. So, afternoon everybody. Welcome to the meeting of the Communities Overview Committee. I'm obliged to inform you that the meeting will be live streamed and recorded. Can I also ask you to ensure the mobile phones are switched off? And I'll ask the members of the committee and officers to introduce themselves. And then we'll also run through who's joining us remotely. So if I go through the room, I'm Councillor Robert Macy, I'm Chair of the Communities Overview Committee.
Councillor Nick Hickman from the May Valley Ward, and I'm Vice Chair of this committee.
Les Winwood, member for Bridge North West and Tasley, subbing today.
Mark Jones, Councillor for Gaboyne, Western Wales, Salatin.
Christian Lee, Shropshire Councillor for Bridge North East and Astley Applicants.
Ted Clark, Councillor for Basin and various other places, but primarily Basin Hill.
Julian Dean, Councillor for Porthill, substituting for Councillor Duncan Kerr.
Councillor David Attenborough, Underdale, substituting for Councillor Michael Halsey.
Jane Trethewey, Assistant Director for Homes and Community.
Everybody's joining us for now. Obviously, as we go through items, I'll ask officers to introduce themselves as we get to those items as well. So I think we're going to have a couple of officers that are joining us online. I'm just having a quick look. I don't think they're online with us as yet, so I'll get them to introduce themselves as we go through. Moving on to item 1, which is apologies for absence and substitutions. We've got a few today. We've had apologies from Councillor Dan Morris, and Les Winwood is substituting, Duncan Kerr with Julian Dean substituting, Viv Parry with David Basma substituting, and Nigel Hartin with Ruth Houghton substituting. So I'm not sure we've got everybody, so if others join us, we will have those. Item 2 is disclosable pecuniary interest. Has anybody got anything they need to declare on that item? Yeah, Mark?
Yeah, I'm Vice Chair of Star Housing Board. Don't know whether that needs declaring or not.
Okay. You have to decide that one, but we'll note it in the records of the meeting. Item 3 is minutes of the meeting held on the 24th of November 2021. And the minutes have been circulated. Have I got a proposer and a second for those? Christian Lee is happy to propose. Have I got a second there? Nick Hignett is a second. All in favour? Okay. Thank you. Item 4 is public question time, and we've not received any public questions. Item 5 is member question time, and we've not received any member questions. So we move swiftly on to item 6, which is the strategic housing review of the housing revenue account management. You had reports being circulated for this prior to this meeting. I think, Jane, is it yourself that's going to introduce this report to the committee?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. This report contains recommendations in relation to the housing revenue account and its function and its future management, and reflects on a report that was commissioned and delivered by consultancy Campbell Tickell, who've made recommendations. Effectively, the Campbell Tickell were appointed to review the housing revenue account in Shropshire. and the focus of this was to look at its alignment to make sure it realised strategic objectives for housing and support, that it was responsive to service needs and expectations, that the housing revenue account resources would deliver long-term sustainability and growth, and that we had good governance and scrutiny to ensure regulatory compliance. And we asked them to particularly look at 4 future management options so that we could have those properly considered. One of which was to continue and extend the existing relationship between council and Star Housing, our arm's length management organisation. The second was to potentially integrate that function back into the council again. The third was to develop the links between Star Housing and Cornodie Development Limited, which is our housing company that delivers new homes for sale. And the fourth was to look at transferring our housing revenue account assets over to a housing association. So those were the things we asked them to give us their views on. And essentially, the report, which you've got in your pack, illustrates that actually Star is a focused delivery agent and a very safe pair of hands for the council. We are seeing high levels of resident satisfaction, and they are delivering top quartile benchmarks against others in the sector. Their repairs performance is good. They have had a slightly weaker voids performance, particularly around the pandemic, and that's partly because of pressure on labour supply, but also issues in terms of material supply as well, which appears to be something that they're now focusing on better. The quality of their work with neighbourhoods is good. There has been some increased antisocial behaviour, again associated with the pandemic. There is a need to strengthen and diversify resident engagement, so we see this as something that Star can improve upon. They have a very good knowledge of their stock, and they're maintaining the properties to the decent home standard which is required. They have a good focus and investment in health and safety compliance. They are thinking about the decarbonisation strategy. They've done a piece of work to target an energy efficiency approach and really understand the stock investment needs, which they've profiled as costing in the region of £180 million across the whole of their housing revenue account stock that they manage. And they provide some wider value-added initiatives as well through the work they do with the Sustain partnership, some of the hostel provision that they have established, and the temporary accommodation that they provide for the council too. In terms of financial management performance, the housing revenue account is in a strong position, good balance and reserves. The day-to-day investment needs are well defined. Evidently, because of the way in which debt is profiled against the housing revenue account, there is the potential for us to choose to defer debt repayment and actually to apply an additional £50 million worth of headroom, as it's referred to, which could supply additional affordable housing units instead of repaying that debt. So that's an option available. That's some flexibility that's been identified. As a structure, as an operation, Star has been identified as relatively lean comparative to others in the sector. So there is some good potential there in terms of developing more surplus, and at the moment there is a £3.9 million management fee surplus forecast, which gives flexibility in terms of developing Star's business and their ability to provide to the council's priorities. At the moment, the option is there with the management agreement to provide some more flexibility to operate and invest in other services. Star has a new sector experienced chair of its board who's looking at the potential for development of the company going forwards. There's a growing level of skills on the Star board as well, with more knowledge around housing and development activity. There's a good level of audit assurance of governance processes, and the client side of Shropshire Council as well is strengthened and is trying to realign and reset that relationship with Star now. There is a potential need for greater visibility and communication with Shropshire Council at senior levels, and there has in the past been somewhat fragmented oversight of housing within Shropshire Council, and that's due to the way in which different aspects of housing delivery are managed in different parts of the council, and that's something that the report picked up on as well. However, the basis of the report is that we have very strong foundations on which to build within our housing revenue account and with STAR. It is fulfilling its remit and is delivering a high quality service. It's seen as providing strong stewardship of the housing revenue account and is an efficient business manager. It can be developed to be more visible and better aligned to the council's priorities, especially around adult social care and children's services. There is development capacity within the scope of what they do, and there is a potential to drive partnership opportunities in future working with them. There's also more opportunity to step up the scope of their offer and the geography in which they operate as well, because historically they've been focused around Oswald Street and Bridgenorth areas, which is the property that they have inherited from the council. Then they can feed into a strategic plan for housing across Shropshire. There is a housing strategy, of course, already in place, but now in terms of making that operational and delivering, there are real opportunities here working with staff. The Camel to Kell report looked through the different options for the future of the housing revenue account and has dismissed the proposal around returning the housing revenue account function back to the council on the basis that this could risk jeopardising the current performance, potentially diluting the housing focus. It would also need to gain tenant support, and that kind of change would require a ballot of tenants. And actually the management focus that would be involved in trying to create that process of change to bring it back in-house is actually better directed at driving other changes that are required in the housing piece. In terms of the stock transfer model, that was also rejected on the basis that with the stock valuation, we now need to take into consideration the decarbonisation investment required as well as offsetting the £83 million of HRA debt that's associated with the stock that STAR manages. And on the basis of the calculations associated with those, we would end up as a local authority having to provide a dowry to a registered provider to take on the stock. So that doesn't benefit the council financially. And it would also again need to win tenant support. Another concern of that structure of the stock transfer to an external body would be the loss of a key lever of control in terms of affordable housing within the county. And that was not seen as something that was balanced by the benefits that could potentially be achieved. So ultimately the findings were the need for a whole system approach across all housing functions with strategic requirements emerging, which require coordination from a single point. The benefits that could be seen are of a holistic approach to housing provision, specialist accommodation and home-based support. We have to be risk aware around housing revenue account priorities and balance the repayment of debt and reinvestment and decarbonisation with growth and better align our governance and oversight, needs analysis and supply planning and delivery of housing. There is a strong starting place here with lots of capacity to integrate the ways in which we're working, and so it feels like a very helpful report in terms of taking forward the council's activities. So in conclusion, the recommendation is to retain STAR, but their remit being realigned with and delivered against the council's priorities, and having that refreshed partnership-based approach, which will hopefully deliver those recommendations. In order to take this forward, the intention is to move forward to renew the management agreement and then to work through a review of STAR's constitution and governance framework and develop a partnership agreement between the council and STAR to focus on the shared aims that we have and to develop a work plan to pick up on a range of the themes that have come out as priorities. Welcome any questions.
Okay, just before I open it up to members, I don't know if Lucy and Sue, if you just want to introduce yourself, just in case there's anything that comes your way. You may well not, but
Hello, I'm Sue Adams. I'm the Managing Director of Star Housing.
Lucy Heath, Client and Commissioning Manager with Homes and Communities Department.
okay, thank you. So I'm quite happy to open this up to members. Obviously, it was quite a lengthy report that you've received. There's a fair amount of detail in it. It did raise a few different issues and so on that have been highlighted in the recommendations. So I'll open it up to members. Julian, were you indicating?
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And apologies if some of this is covered in the report, because I only discovered I was subbing recently. But just a couple of things with regards to decarbonisation, and also with regards to sort of perhaps unpicking the recommendation. So first of all, on decarbonisation, there was a really interesting event I went to a couple of weeks ago, which unfortunately Star weren't at, but it was trying to bring together the buyers and sellers in the sort of retrofit field in the area at the Pump House Knowledge Hub in Shrewsbury, and I think there's a huge skills gap, we know, when it comes to decarbonisation. So in terms of those sort of the idea of having a strategic focus on where we head, and wondering what Star can do and what we can do with this refresh to ensure that we are developing the skills and the confidence in the long-term market for retrofit, so that we can actually get the skills together to do the work that is needed. And the second question is I'm a bit confused as to what this recommendation really says. Does it say we are looking towards merging Star and CDL? Because to me that may well make sense in terms of future building and just being a bigger player and being able to get to build zero carbon. And then the final point I'll just throw in at this stage is that, which is perhaps slightly off the topic, but the other presentation I heard recently was from the arm's length building company that belongs to Exeter City Council, and they now only build passive house. And they reckon that we're talking, between 0 and 5% uplift in terms of the cost that involves. And they've just recently built a passive house leisure centre, and so at some stage, either probably through the other committees I'm on, I'm going to propose that we actually go and have a bit of a visit to see how they managed to do that, because I'm still wondering why we're not getting to that yet. Thanks.
Okay. I don't know who wants to pick that up. Jane, Sue, between you.
Okay, 3 questions in one. In terms of the decarbonisation agenda, we're obviously very aware of that. Our batch report did suggest it's an incredibly challenging agenda for us, especially around the retrofit. We are looking to take advantage of opportunities as they come around. So, for example, we have recently won some funding from the Decarbonisation Fund, which was a joint bid among a number of different housing associations as well as ourselves, in order to improve the attractiveness of that bid to government, so that we've got one set of people to deal with. And we were very pleased to get funding to retrofit 27 of our solid wall properties. However, the agenda is much bigger than that, as you know, and we will seek to continue to work with a number of different organisations to make sure that we are able to do as much as we can to achieve net zero. First off, the first thing that we're doing is we are going to kick off looking at our independent living schemes, and we're going to be doing a number of different schemes on those. So, for example, in Greenfields in Bridgnorth, we're already fitting air source heat pumps to that scheme in conjunction with tenants. We must keep in mind that these are people's homes. We need to keep tenants on board with our initiatives. So that's what we're doing. It's difficult to see with current funding how we'll be able to achieve net zero. I'll say that now. But what we are doing is taking advantage of every opportunity we can to try and achieve as much as we can with that agenda. I think we are in discussions with government constantly about this. I mean, myself and my asset manager are going to be meeting with Philip Dunn fairly shortly to talk about this. So it is something that we are continuing to work on. You mentioned about passive house. We are building a passive house pilot. We've got 2 properties that we're going to try and build. We are hitting some issues with that particular build at the moment, but we are learning lessons that we can then apply to our future building that we're doing. And I know that CDL is also, as I say, that's not my company, but CDL also looking at those issues as well. And we do realise that there is a bit of a trade-off between, the increased costs of doing passive house versus the kind of normal type of build properties. But we are going to see how we can apply those lessons learned from what we're doing on that pilot to our other build properties. Sorry, I've now forgotten the third question that you had. Jane, thank you very much for rescuing me on that one.
That's fine. So in terms of the recommendation, it's not intended to imply that there's a merger of Cornovy Developments Limited and Star Housing. What it is intended to pick up on is the potential for there to be a shift in responsibilities between the 2 organisations, because of course Cornovy is set up specifically as a house builder. That's absolutely what they do, and they're doing that at some scale as well. So one of the things we're interested to review is the potential for Cornovy to do that at a greater scale and to be developing affordable housing, potentially on behalf of Star in future. But that's something that's subject to a lot of additional work really on the governance side and structure side, procurement issues, etc. So, but that's part of what we want to develop an understanding of through the workshops and the planning over the coming months. So that's why it's referenced in there that there is a connection between CDL and Star, but it's not a merger that's proposed.
Can I just pick up one point, which there was an additional point, and I apologise for asking so many questions at once. The other one was around skills, really. So we know that there's a skills gap. I mean, just to tell you the story, as Mayor of Shrewsbury last year, I went to the graduation ceremony at Shrewsbury College and chatted to some construction students, and they hadn't even come across the word retrofit, most of them, which was a bit worrying. That we're still dealing with traditional building skills very much, as far as I can tell. Paris, on the other hand, has recently bought apparently some houses which they are retrofitting, Paris College, and they are therefore developing those new skills. And this, I mean, I'm afraid I'll be a bit of a broken record because I'll come back to this under the economic strategy. But I'm just wondering, what this new strategic thinking, what your thinking is in terms of how we make sure that those skills are being developed locally.
I can't respond entirely in full because I think it's a very big question, and it's not just about housing really, it's about the broader zero carbon or low carbon economy. But actually this is something that's been picked up through the work that Tim Baldwin's been doing with his bids into various government funding streams for decarbonisation, and that the skills aspect of that is absolutely critical, because we are aware, of course you are as well, that across the sector there are limitations in capacity, and people being able to actually bid for the work and to understand what's required. And so in part going through the course of developing a passive house pilot by Star is a way of flushing out where we do have that sort of expertise in the locality and being able to sort of develop that knowledge and understanding. It also develops skills within the organisation as well at Star to know how to procure that kind of delivery, which of course is different to traditional build. I think the quoted prices of 0 to 5% uplift from Exeter, I've met with Exeter and heard their quite impressive presentations as well in the past, but I think that it's taken them many years to get to a point working very closely with a small number of partners to get to those sorts of price margins. Typically passive house tends to be significantly more than that in terms of an uplift on traditional build, and that I've heard that from many parties in different locations, so, but that said, it's the drive that we have for the future to think about how we can be far more efficient in future in all of our development. So I think we take the challenge on, just we don't have any easy answers at the moment.
Okay, just picking up on your point about whether it was a merger or something else, are there any other areas of overlap you can see just initially between Star and Cornovy or anything along those lines?
There is quite an interesting area that we've had conversations about and explored, along with Sue, which is the potential for Star, with its absolute expertise in property and tenancy management, to potentially in the future, when Cornovy moves into the private rented sector market, which is something it's exploring at the moment, hasn't decided absolutely to do that, because that would be subject to loan funding from its shareholder, which is of course the council. That in that instance it might be a very good arrangement for Star to provide those sorts of services. I think it's those sorts of overlaps and areas of combined interest that we want to explore further.
Okay, thank you. Les?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, first of all, obviously there's so much good that can come from this report. I'm pleased to see that it's suggesting and saying that Star must be retained. They are so well respected by the tenants, and this has taken a long time to come. And there's no doubt out there, if you talk to tenants, they really do now link themselves with Star, well and truly. I think they're doing a great job personally. There is so much that can be achieved in partnership working, and as we move forward with Star and others, there can be so much done. But it is down to funding, of course, and limitations will be there as it moves forward. But I'm pleased that obviously because it's over the years it's become part of the housing. As far as the tenants are concerned, it's become a well-respected organisation, and that we must not lose or mess about with, if you like. So yes, I like the report. There's so much more moving forward, that working with partners as well. Star have really got their place in that, and we must be careful not to mess it up.
Okay, I'm sure those will be welcome comments to Sue coming from that.
Thanks very much. I promise I didn't pay him. Yeah, I mean, just a few thoughts. Obviously, we're really pleased that the Campbell Care report recognised the good performance of Star, and recognise that we're actually currently working in a much more challenging environment post-COVID. There is also the new challenge coming at us of a new regulatory framework. Previously, councils did not come under a regulatory framework. They felt that the democratic process was enough, but the government have now changed their mind and said they should be under the same sort of remit that housing associations are, and they've strengthened that framework as well. And also, obviously, there's the financial challenges which we've touched on in terms of the decarbonisation agenda, but obviously new builds, very challenging, issues around the cost of supplies, the cost of labour, all of those things create quite a challenging environment. However, we are really looking forward to a further 10-year contract with the council, being their council's almos, being the face of the council for our council tenants, and dealing with those challenges and realigning our work to meet the future council priorities. So it is something that we're really looking forward to, and certainly we've already kicked off that work, and I met with Lucy this morning and started to sketch out some of the areas that we need to explore, and as I say, it's not a simple business. I mean, we're almost like several businesses in one. We manage support services, we manage development, we manage tenancies and people's personal issues, as well as just doing repairs and maintenance. So it's not an easy business, but also it does contribute a lot, I think, to the wider council agenda, and we look forward to continuing to do that. So thank you.
David?
Yes, thank you. I just want to back up Councillor Winwood's comments and say that my experience is a very good one with STAR from conversation with tenants, and therefore I'm very pleased with the recommendation which we've got before us today. Also, I've got experience of your developments. I've got a development in Londale, I'm not correct. And my experience of that is that it was being really done well. There was lots of consultation, lots of involvement, and I think that I really praise you for that. I think it's really commendable. Just to clarify, as I said, I'm studying today, so probably not normally on this committee, but we're talking about option 3, isn't it? Option 3, that basically what's being recommended today, and to get more work, clearly, Canova and STAR working together and doing more, which I think is very useful. And the one thing that worries me about Canova, to be honest with you, is that it seems to me that affordable housing ambitions, which were originally outlined when Canova was set up, have not been met. And I worry about that because I think there's a lack of affordable housing, particularly in rural areas. And I was hoping that maybe if you had a greater link between Cornovi and STAR, that maybe that might be that's an area which might be tackled. There might be more affordable housing. And lastly, the only other comments I would like to make is that you talked about decarbonisation. And I wondered, is there, you talked very much in terms of grants, and I wonder whether there's a program. I might not be talking from lack of knowledge here, but whether there is you have a program for decarbonisation.
Because of the sheer scale of the decarbonisation agenda, we don't have like a plan for every single property that we've got. So what we've done is that we're taking advantage of any opportunity for grant funding. Normally that doesn't mean though that the grant will fully pay for that decarbonisation. We have to obviously raise resources to put towards that to actually undertake the work. And then we've identified areas where we think we get most bang for our bucks. So, for example, the independent living communities, because they're on a smaller footprint, we can tackle more properties together, and also then they're not subject to the right to buy, because one of the risks that we've got is that we could invest an awful lot of money in a property, and then that property is bought, and because of the cost of the works involved, we're not going to be able to recoup that money that we might have spent on those properties. So that's how we're doing it. It'd be nice if we had the funding to be able to put a big clear plan about exactly what we might spend on every single property to achieve net zero, but we're not able to do that at this point. So what we're doing is that we're trying to maximise the amount of properties that we can do with the funding that we've got. But saying that, new opportunities are coming up all the time, and whenever they come up, we put in for them. And to say we were successful in the last round, and that's another 24 properties ticked off.
Okay, I'll just come back to Julie, because I'm guessing it's a connected point.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering what your view is on. So one of the sort of retrofit models is this thing called Energiesprong, and what they do, because one of the outcomes of the installation is that people's bills come down, so there is some money released, but obviously you can't just stick the rent up to make up the difference. So I understand they introduce a comfort charge, so they have an additional charge, which is a way of getting tenants to contribute to the costs of the retrofit. I'm just wondering what your view is on that model, or if you've had a think about whether there's ways of doing something like that as part of the funding for this.
Yeah, I'm aware of that model and the programme in Nottingham. We're a bit hamstrung now. When that was introduced, then the rent standard wasn't in place, which limits the amount of rents that we can raise and exactly what we can charge. And Nottingham raised the rent above, well, considerably above the rate of inflation at that particular time when they were introducing it. We can't do that now. If we make improvements to a property, then we cannot increase the rent. It has to be done within the income that we're raising, because, as I say, we have to meet the rent standard. In fact, as I say, for 4 years we had to cut rents, so we had even less money available, and that's fed through now into the business plan. It is an interesting scheme. What I would say is that, you know, Nottingham have very much looked at that. They've made that a priority. We have to look at that within the balance of priorities that we've got within Shropshire. That means, you know, discussing with our tenants what they think the priorities are, how that fits in with their aspirations in terms of the service delivery. We also have to balance that with building new properties as well, so and also at the standards that we want to build them. So there's a whole number of things that we need to balance before we make sort of decisions as to how much we are able to commit at this particular time to the decarbonisation agenda. But it is one of our key priorities. We've spent an awful lot of money on it over the years, and we will continue to do that. But as I say, we need to balance that with our other priorities within the housing revenue.
Sorry, yes, I understand. As I understood it, it wasn't actually a rent increase. It was a separate charge. They called it a comfort charge. So that's what I was wondering about.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that myself.
Okay.
I've never heard of property related costs being able to be added on, but certainly I know Nottingham did at one point raise their rent above, much above the average, in order to fund some of that work, and I'm sort of assuming that that was part of it at that particular time. That rent standard's only been in for a couple of years now, so, you know, we have to follow that standard. We don't have a choice in it. And as I say, we will be meeting with Philip Dunn, as you know. He's quite a leading light in terms of the decarbonisation agenda, and these are the sorts of constraints that we'll be explaining to him in terms of our work.
So if you've got a specific example, Julie, you want to send over, whether it applies or not, then yeah, we received. Can I just quickly go back to Sue? You're talking about the council priorities, and I'm guessing Jane would have a view as well. Obviously, in the report, it talks about the specialist housing need, and obviously we've heard in different committees about the need for young adults needing care, needing accommodation. We've got examples in our bits of supported living, things like that. I'm just wondering what the level of specialist housing need is, and how this sort of review might lead to that being improved, how we address that.
Yes, I think this is an area that's requiring a fair bit of investigation at the moment, and I do have now a strategy and development manager, Melanie Holland, who's exploring this area with colleagues in children's and adult services. At the moment, there is a sort of a stream of property that's brought along by colleagues in adults and children's services to support their housing needs of various kinds, specialist housing needs. But a lot of the time that's leased accommodation, or it's accommodation provided through registered providers, and it can work out extremely expensive. A lot of it's what's referred to as exempt accommodation, where the charges can be quite significant. So we're very interested in having a look at how far we can go to try and deliver some of that through different routes, which could be through STAR, it could be through CDL, just developing the right kind of stock in the right places. That requires a certain amount of forecasting from those services of need, whereas what tends to happen at the moment is there's a more kind of immediate response and reaction to need in the moment, and then seeking the right accommodation for that immediate need, whereas what we want to move to is more longer term forecasting and understanding of trends, so that we can start to build the right accommodation to better standard in appropriate locations. So this is definitely something that we want to explore further with STAR, and those conversations have already been initiated with colleagues at STAR, who I'm glad to say are open to them.
Ted.
Thank you, Chair. Very brief. First of all, thanks for the report and for the very detailed replies that have been given as required. But it's only a small issue, or it's a small item rather than expanded. Will we be getting reports, or will it be coming back? The relationship between Canobi and STAR is developed, I'm hoping that it'll come back to this, it will come back to this committee, so that we've got an overview of what's going on there, please.
Just picking up on that point and some of the other points, which, yeah, I think coming from the report, I mean, I was sort of suggesting that this committee looks at that evolving, whether it's the management structure between the council, between Star, between Cornovi, and we can pick up on different elements through that and how they're reorganising so that we've got a clear view. Because I think the report is clear that there is lots of potential there for all the organisations by aligning. But I don't know. That's what I was going to suggest to the committee, is we keep this on the work programme as something we want to look into, and we'll start as the work starts. We can liaise with officers at appropriate points if we need to set up or have them report back. But I don't know, Jane or others, if you want to add.
If you wanted to propose that, I'm happy to second it, but I'm sorry I'm intervening.
No, that's fine. I mean, it feels like we've explored a good bit of this. It feels like it needs probably that little bit of work now from others on the report and the other bits. But I'm happy to propose that we keep it on the work programme. We ask them to come back and keep us involved, and we'll set up different things as we need to through the process.
Specifically relating to the...
how they're working.
Yeah.
I mean, my only thing I would like to ask as well, just to check we include it, is I've done various roles with the housing hat on and so on. I'm just aware within the council at the moment it probably sits across at least 2 directorates, if not more. I'm thinking that that's probably where I'd like to explore as well and see the potential of bringing it under one line of view as such for housing, but sort of taking this report that step further. So, but I don't know, Jane, do you want to say anything before we pass that? Is that a way forward?
I'm very happy to come back to this committee again and give that update in future. You know, when we've had a chance with workshops with Star and with Cornovi to explore how that might work and the practicalities of it, and also picking up, Chair, on your point, this was also something identified through the Campbell report, the need for that kind of focus, that strategic focus within housing to oversee the activities of the organisations, that governance clarity as well. And one of the things that is being explored is also the way in which at the moment we have the Asset Assurance Board and the Housing Supervisory Board, both overseeing different aspects of housing delivery through Star and through Cornovi Development Limited. Again, opportunities for us to try and streamline that along with a strategic housing overview, I would suggest.
So if everybody's happy with that, we'll add that to the work programme. We'll follow it closely, and as soon as there's something more to work on, we'll bring it back. Okay. So if everybody's happy, we will thank everybody for coming and for Sue and Jane for presenting. We'll watch how it develops. So moving on to the next item, again housing related, we're on to the draft revised housing allocations policy. So I think that's probably you again, Jane.
Yes, sorry. This committee has previously had a presentation in relation to allocations, and so this is now coming back again for review now that we have a draft revised allocations policy. Between Shropshire Council and the housing associations within Shropshire, there are close to 20,000 social housing dwellings for either rent or low-cost home ownership. And what we're looking to do now is to provide an improved allocations strategy to make best use of that housing stock to meet the need that we can see within the county. So the majority of the dwellings in social housing ownership are for rent, and most of those are general needs, so therefore not designed for any particular specialist groups or older people. On average, across England, there is a 16% proportion of affordable housing, whereas Shropshire has 13%, so we are lower than the average in what we provide. So what we're trying to do with the revised allocations policy, this is a draft for consultation, is to both pick up on statutory guidance to make sure we're in line with what's required, but also make use of all the flexibilities that we can to make sure that we prioritise the people in greatest housing need, as well as supporting some of our other strategic priorities, such as picking up on key workers and others. The intention is that the revised allocations policy for consultation goes to Cabinet in April, and following that there will be a period of consultation with the housing associations and others, and it will then come back to this committee again before going on for final approval and adoption. That's the course which we want to take with this, and we are seeking initial views and feedback on the policy that we're proposing. So in addition to Star Housing, Shropshire Town and Rural Housing, there are 32 housing associations and almshouses who are registered with the Regulatory Social Housing Homes England. We are not in regular strategic contact with all of those 32. There are a number which are the more significant providers. Some have a relatively small number, but nevertheless, all of those have housing which we ought to be able to make use of as the Strategic Housing Authority. Around 95% of those homes are for social and affordable rent, with the rest being some form or other of low-cost home ownership. And of all of those dwellings, around 12% are for older people. And around 1%, only about 150 dwellings and rooms are supported housing independent living schemes, so a relatively small proportion of those. Only around 24% are one-bedroom properties, which is significant because we have quite a large housing need for one-bedroom properties, which at the moment we're not meeting very well. 56% are houses as opposed to flats that sit on maintenance. 20% are bungalows. In terms of the geographical spread, it is reasonably widespread across Shropshire, so 38% in the central wards, 32% in the northern wards and 30% in the southern wards. But there is an awareness that in the south of the county there's a need for greater provision because of the spread of that provision geographically. The largest providers of social housing are listed in the report for just awareness. As I say, there are many more than that who are actually operating within the county. Of course, a number of the former districts undertook stock transfer to housing associations, and so the Housing Association Connexus and Housing Plus have the benefit of those stock transfers, historic stock transfers. Since April 2009, just over 300 council dwellings have been sold under right to buy, but actually those sales are now increasing, and we're now getting around 29 per year being sold through the right to buy, and that is still continuing to increase. In 2021, there was a net increase of almost 190 affordable dwellings within Shropshire, and we expect that to increase again this year to around 200 dwellings, net increase of 200 dwellings, that is. So there is still a sort of gradual increase in affordable housing units, but that's set against a significant ongoing demand. Just moving through to the revised allocations policy itself. Previously, committee saw a report on Home Point, and then on the allocations policy scheme, which was reviewed by a working group which provided some recommendations. So the revised allocations policy has been produced based upon that, and an 8-week consultation period will be undertaken with our registered providers, housing associations, as well as other stakeholders. The policy incorporates recommendations that came out of those earlier exchanges with this committee and working group, and it is intended to apply to all allocations of council-owned stock, as well as all nominations to housing associations, registered providers. And it also includes qualification criteria and extends the number of bands which we will apply for people to be categorised under. It's intended that the existing nomination agreements that we have with some of the housing associations are reinvigorated, because some of those have not been so well enforced recently, and we also established formal nominations with all of the larger national housing associations that do actually have stock operating in Shropshire, even though they may only have small numbers of homes. Nevertheless, we want to make sure that we access those homes and get the rights to all of the new affordable housing that gets delivered in the county. We also want to review the council's tenancy policy and tenancy strategy, and produce a specialist accommodation and independent living strategy, and an affordable and intermediate housing options strategy, because these will also help to complement the allocation strategy that's coming forward now. At the moment, the policy is funded through the general fund, and STAR, or housing associations who advertise their empty properties, pay the council a fee every time they advertise a property through our allocation system. And we want to move that to a council housing register with nominations agreements with the housing associations, and so we will review the funding arrangements associated with that. To make sure that it's legitimate in the way that charges are levied. So moving on to the appendices and the actual strategy policy, I should say itself, the revised policy. The purpose of this is, as it sets out, our aims are to ensure that the people in the greatest housing need have the greatest opportunity to access suitable housing that best meets their needs. We have to prevent and relieve homelessness, make best use of the council's and our housing association partners' stock, and meet statutory and strategic aims. We also want to contribute to the development of sustainable communities, and also allow the greatest possible degree of choice in the allocation of affordable housing to those who are applying for it. There will be applicants ineligible under government regulations, and they cannot join the housing register. We will usually only accept applications to the housing register for those who are in housing need, and there are a set of housing need qualifying criteria shown in the appendix, which sets out what the 6 bands are intended to be going forwards under this revised policy. We want to, with this policy now, only accept applications to the housing register from applicants who have a local connection with the Shropshire Council area, which either would mean that they are normally resident in Shropshire, or they have a local connection with the area, either through family association or secure employment. Resident means resident for at least a year prior to the application being made. And there is some definition as well as to what family association means in the policy, and what secure employment means as well. The local connection requirement isn't required for members of the armed forces and former service personnel, or their bereaved spouses or civil partners following the death. Also, it wouldn't apply to serving or former members of the reserve forces who need to move because of injury or medical condition or disability, or to existing social housing tenants who have a reasonable preference because of a need to move to Shropshire to avoid hardship, or if they've been offered work here. So this is a change in terms of the categorisation of who will be able to actually register on our Shropshire Council's housing register for reference. There is a section regarding unacceptable behaviour to make clear that we won't accept people on the housing register where we believe that they've behaved unacceptably somewhere else, which I hope will be understood. Cases will be considered on an individual basis, though, so that we're not putting people into a difficult position when we think that there's a reason that we should reconsider that. There is a financial and needs assessment that will be applied, and we're seeking for this to be for households with an income of more than £50,000 gross per annum, or with savings and assets of more than 200,000. Will not be considered to be in housing need and won't qualify to be on the housing register. And that financial assessment will have regard to the financial resources of both the applicant and the cost and availability of alternative suitable accommodation as well. And note that under this financial section, we are saying that the council will retain the discretion in exceptional circumstances where it's considered necessary to disapply the qualification criteria and place an applicant in a band if we think it's appropriate. So in exceptional circumstances, we can use our discretion. We will have some transitional arrangements for this, where we think that there are people who are already on our register, who have a certain income and who have a connection to Shropshire, if we think that they will struggle to meet their housing needs through the open market. In terms of the age of applicants, this section just picks up that there will be occasions when people under the age of 18 may be eligible to go on the register, particularly care leavers or those either homeless or threatened with homelessness. In terms of homeless applicants, there is a duty that Shropshire Council has under legislation, which we will abide by, and that's captured in section 7. Transfer applicants will be those currently in existing Shropshire Council accommodation who can be considered for rehousing, will not normally be considered until they've been resident in their home for a year. I won't go through the administrative details set out in the further sections, because that's really about just the way in which things work practically. I'll just reference the statutory requirements in section 14 that just explains that under the Housing Act of 1996 we have to ensure that when we're allocating and nominating to housing accommodation, we give reasonable preference to certain groups, and those are groups that we will always have to prioritise, so it's just calling your attention to those for clarity. And additional preference as well to a further category which includes armed forces and services families. The banding system is now, as I mentioned, capturing 6 bands of activity, and that provides us with a greater way of stratifying the priority which we want to give to people, which I hope will make sense to members as you review it. We do want to offer the greatest possible choice in the allocation of affordable housing, but we also want to make sure that housing is allocated to those with the greatest need. And on occasion, that might mean that we have to make direct lets, and this policy allows for that to happen where that's appropriate. However, applicants will have the opportunity to bid for properties that they're entitled to be considered for. All the properties managed by Star Housing and all housing association properties where we have nomination rights, we would want to see advertised through choice-based lettings, which is the home point system that we currently have. And applicants accepted onto the housing register can then bid and apply for the properties that are advertised. And the intention is that the process is to work through the bands with the people with the highest banding who've been on the list for the longest time, getting priority in each case. So in terms of supported accommodation at the moment, applicants can indicate if they want to be considered for supported accommodation, but will usually only be offered one if they meet the set of criteria that's laid out here. And bungalows will usually only be offered to applicants with poor health or disability who require accommodation on longer level, bungalows being particularly in demand, of course. There are requirements in some instances for applicants to have support or care packages to enable them to take up accommodation and be able to sustain it, which is important to consider. There is also going to be a requirement for assistance to be provided for anybody who might have difficulty participating in this allocations process for various reasons. And where applicants can't submit bids themselves, there will be an assisted bidding process so that they are able to manage. There's reference in here to local lettings plans, which may occasionally be introduced to achieve sustainable neighbourhoods or to deliver some specific local strategic outcomes, or because of the requirement of planning conditions in certain instances, and that is still applicable under this policy. Occasionally sensitive lets will be required, properties may be identified for that reason, and specific criteria could be applied to individual homes where required because of that, to achieve some wider objectives, and it's worth bearing that in mind. I won't go through any more detail. There is a lot of detail in the policy, which I hope members will appreciate, references the detail that has to be provided for people to really understand how their application will be managed, and to allow the officers administering it to be able to do so in an equitable and fair way, in a transparent way. Appendix A captures the bans that are being applied. The first is homeless households to whom we owe a main duty. The second is homeless households who owed the relief duty, and that's outlined what that means. The third band is resettlement, homelessness prevention, serious medical need, overcrowding, under occupation. The fourth band is where people need to give or receive support or have medical need, disrepair, overcrowding, homelessness, etc. The fifth band is where people are sharing essential facilities or are forced to live apart or are key workers. The sixth band captures those who, following a financial need assessment, wouldn't be able to purchase or rent market-priced housing within Shropshire, which is suitable for their needs. And the seventh band is where applicants would be able to purchase or rent market-priced housing suitable for their needs. I don't think I should say anything else because I said quite a lot already, but I hope that captures everything that's required.
I hope so. I hope that was the comprehensive introduction. So I'm just, I am conscious it's quite an in-depth paper and all the different policies and the other bits and so on, and sometimes institutionally we're not great at having memory on it. So I'm conscious sort of the committee looked at this, I think, in January of 2021 before I joined the committee. I'm getting a big thumbs up from the back, so yeah, I've got the meeting it went to correct. I'm just conscious that the committee formed a working group that looked at this. It raised a number of questions and recommendations at that point, as Jane alluded to. So I know some of the members of this committee are still the same as prior to that point. Obviously, there's a lot of people substituting today, I appreciate. I was wondering whether, given this is going to Cabinet in April, I think it is from the report, and it's going out for public consultation, and then it's reported it will come back to us before it goes back to Cabinet after that. I'm wondering whether we reform the working group to have a quick look to see whether it's encapsulated all the things that were originally put forward by that group, and it can sort of come back and report to our next meeting alongside what's come back from the public consultation. And then if we want to make any comments before it goes back to Cabinet, that would seem a way of doing it. But I'm conscious, I'm quite happy that people ask the questions now on specifics, but I'm just thinking that's a way ahead of that group could meet, consider this, come back with some considered comments on what it's looked at before, and then we incorporate that. So, oh, sorry, I think I can see a hand. Daniel is.
Hello, Chair. So Daniel Webb here, Scrutiny Officer. From memory, I don't think there's actually anybody on this committee who was on that working group prior to that. So my recommendation, and then certainly the councillor who led that is now sits on Cabinet, so couldn't. So I would suggest, Chair, that you perhaps lead that group and you invite nominations from within the committee to take part in that one-off meeting.
And you should have ignored that hand at the back. Okay. No, I mean, I'm quite happy to lead that group if I can get a couple of volunteers from the committee just to have a look at this and see what was noted from last time, have a look through, see if there's anything else of concern. I'm quite happy to do that. I'm conscious, thank you, Ted, and I'm conscious as well, we've got a number of substitutes that we won't want to speak on the committee members' behalf. So I was going to say, Ted, if you're happy, if anybody else wants to, I think we'll send a note round to the rest of the committee as well and see who would like to do that, so that the ones that aren't here have got the opportunity as well. But with that in mind, I mean, if anybody, any other members want to ask questions now based on this, I'll take those. So yeah, Julian.
Thank you. So as I understand it, the local connection is a new change. The idea that people have to have a local connection. So I suppose my concern is in two parts. So looking at it, it suggests that a local connection could be secure employment, but that would require at least a year's, and I don't remember the household, for at least 1 year's duration. So I'm just trying to think of scenarios. So somebody gets what we call a key worker job, who currently lives in Paris, who is, qualifies in many other ways, but doesn't have family members here, and has only just got the job, but is in housing need. Under this policy, as I get it, they would no longer be able to get on the register. So am I getting that right? Which is a concern. And the other way around, I suppose, is what impact do we think this will have on Shropshire residents who are in housing need but are looking to move somewhere else? Is there a possibility of a local connection war going on with? I don't know what the story is nationally in those terms, but would it result in disadvantaging Shropshire residents who are looking to get a job in Telford, for example?
Well, in answer, this is actually bringing Shropshire in line with pretty much the rest of the country, to be honest. So people organisations, councils do typically apply a local connection for really the reasons of trying to make sure that we're not importing people who have the opportunity to move here because they choose to move here rather than because they already have an existing connection here and a rationale to move. And this is in light, of course, of the fact that there is a limited supply of affordable housing, and there's a degree of rationing, if you like, which we have to apply, and we have to have a basis upon which to do that. And this is one of those reasons on which we would make a choice and a selection of who we would wish to prioritise. So you're right in the assumption that somebody would need to have a year's duration of employment under the policy as set out. If somebody's got secure employment for a year, then yes, they would then be able to be accepted onto the register. In reality, for them to actually find accommodation that suited their needs, it probably would take a reasonable length of time anyway, given the sort of pressure and numbers on the housing register as it stands. So I think the reality is, though, having a register that limits the number of people who are able to get on it in the first place means that those who are in the greatest housing need will be able to move through it more quickly, and actually we'll be able to address those sort of more extreme ends of our needs spectrum, and that's the goal with this.
Ruth, I think you were next. Could you just introduce yourself for those if anybody's watching online as well?
Firstly, apologies for being late. I was stuck behind agricultural traffic. Ruth Houghton, Councillor for Bishop's Castle. A couple of questions, really. I did think the allocations policy needed revision, so I sort of welcome this, but there are some queries. Firstly, the local connection, there doesn't seem to be any criteria included in the paper around anyone with caring responsibilities, and I wonder how informal family carers are being considered when they're applying to be on the register, because for many people that is a driver for moving or needing accommodation in the area. And then my other question was around the 106 agreements referred to in 23.2, and specifically how local groups such as parish councils are involved in any determination of eligibility or not, and any allocation or not of those particular properties in their parish. Thank you.
Without being able to go through immediately and find the right paragraph, there is actually reference to people who have caring responsibilities as part of the eligibility criteria. I'd have to kind of scroll through and find it for you, but that is picked up there in the criteria. In terms of local councils being included in respect of the Section 106s, that's to some extent subject to the planning process as to how that is managed, but that's something we can take away and have a look at, absolutely.
If I may, Chair, is there a comprehensive list of all those dwellings that are subject to a Section 106? With recent experience in the local parish, there's been seen a lot of toing and froing to try and find the Section 106 agreement.
I'm sorry, that's not a question I'm in a position to answer directly, but I can find out for you. Yeah.
Okay, David.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask something about the anti-social behaviour and unacceptable behaviour provisions, and whether obviously I'm new to this committee, and so I wasn't sure whether that was something that was new that you brought in recently.
Again, that's a typical thing to include to reference, how we would define that somebody is in need, and also how we decide if somebody's appropriate to go on the list. I would have to check whether that's a new element or not. I'm not 100% certain, to be perfectly honest, but I can come back to you and clarify.
Can I just ask as well, Jen, I think you referenced probably about 3 new strategies that will come out of the back of and referring to this. Just taking that point in line with the housing strategy you mentioned earlier, is there one place where everyone can access all of the housing strategies in one place?
The other ones I referenced are ones that we intend to develop, so they're not in existence yet, so you won't find them. Yes, ultimately these will be locked on the council's website, so people can access them.
I'm just thinking in terms of whether it's this committee or its members in general and so on, being able to follow that theme of these are all the strategies relating in some way to housing it allows them to follow that through. So
Yes, these do derive from the original housing strategy that was approved at Cabinet last year and Council last year, where it set out certain areas where a greater focus was required, and so the intention to deliver strategies will pick up on that requirement.
okay, so let's
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. Thank you for the report, which is very comprehensive and takes a lot of reading and understanding. Very often, local members like myself, and trust applies to pretty well all the other councillors, get approached by somebody to see whether you can help things along in their inverted commas, because they're struggling to, or they don't believe that they're on the right banding and all that sort of thing. I think it would be useful in the future, perhaps when this has gone through council and been approved, that members perhaps had an information pack that just detailed perhaps 1 or 2 contact numbers. I know you can look it all up on the website, but I think it would be useful if members were, particularly the new members, were reminded of particular contacts or one particular person they could contact, because I know there are 2 particular cases I can think of in 2 separate villages in my ward, where there were some houses built, handed over to a housing company, and they were all allocated to people from the town here actually, so nobody local got in. There's a lot of emails in my inbox about that. And in another village, there was a planning application. It's not been built yet, but at the planning application stage, the parish council asked as a condition that all those houses would be offered to local people first, and that was agreed. And I think if this had been done in the other village as well, it would have perhaps I wouldn't have got so many emails, let's put it that way. So I think that's quite useful. The other thing just to ask is this £50,000 and £200,000 limits that were suggested. I presume that'll be cost of living linked, because there's going to be a substantial increase in the cost of living in the next few years. So I assume those figures will be going up as cost of living goes up. Thank you.
Yes, there'll be, yeah, absolutely. These things have to be kept under review to make sure that they're still applicable, still appropriate. So yes, absolutely agree.
Okay. Christian?
Yes, following on from Councillor Hignet's comments about people contacting him for assistance with their housing applications, I too have had a number of people over the past year asking for assistance, and I've always found the people involved with Home Point very helpful in giving me guidance as to what these particular individuals can do, making sure that there would be appropriate banding. But there have been occasions where local residents have sort of got wind of the property being let to someone from outside the area, and it doesn't go down well when they feel that they've got a genuine housing need and lived in Bridge North for a long time. So I do welcome the change in the lettings policy.
I don't know whether that's something that when the working group meets, whether there's an example, even if it's not based, obviously everyone's not being rebanded if this did go through, but I'm just wondering if there's an example that group could be given of this is how it would work. On an example, there are 8 new houses in a village, this is how, something like that maybe, just to give that assurance to see. Okay. Are there any other questions? Mark?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a question, it's got an answer, or whether I should ask it. I've lost my little bit thing here, but I think in 5.1 it says we've got 20,000 dwellings of affordable housing owned or leased by the council. And then on 5.4 it says approximately 7% of social housing has been empty for 6 months. There's various reasons for that. That seems a long time. And are those other providers of housing stock doing enough, or do we scrutinise them heavily enough to see that they're doing up to the standards that our fantastic Star Housing are doing, and their fantastic board and vice chairman? Do we scrutinise them enough to make sure that they're doing enough to provide housing?
Yes, I'd note that as well, and they're having quite a few exchanges, in fact something with Councillor Howard about the vacant properties in housing association ownership, they tend to try and turn around their properties very quickly because that's of course their revenue income. But where they stand empty, that's typically because they have a significant problem with them. It's usually where people have moved out and they need substantial investment in them to bring them up to standard. But sometimes it's also to do with a bigger investment that's required, for example, bringing them up to the right energy performance certificate standard, which could be a really significant cost. And sometimes they will try and group together a number of properties to tackle all in one go, and that's certainly been the example with some of the Connexus properties that have a number of those in that situation. So it is scrutinised. It is something that's picked up through the empty property officer in the private rented sector team, and also reviewed through the Social Housing Forum, which is the meeting of Housing Association Chief Executives, which I attend along with the cabinet member for housing. So it is something that we have eyes on, if you like, and we do pay attention to it. There have been some empty for a period of time, but we're aware of them all. We know the reasons for that. In some instances as well, it's also because they're actually seeking to dispose of those properties because they have realised that they can't bring them into operation without a level of investment that's actually uneconomic for them to undertake, given the rental revenue that they would get for them. But in those instances, what we've tried to do as the council is to challenge them to see if they can do some other arrangement, some kind of regeneration, which might see demolition and rebuild, for example, rather than just trying to renovate stock that's perhaps past its sell-by date. But yeah, these are ongoing challenges for us across the board.
Can I just check as well? It talks about it going to cabinet on the 27th of April. Once it's gone through the consultation and so on, when's it? If it goes through all of that without, or you have to incorporate the revisions, what sort of timeline are you looking at for the actual adoption of the new policy?
I'd like that to be this year, so yeah,
Okay.
able to sort of get it into motion as quickly as possible.
Okay. Okay. Has anybody got anything else they'd like to ask on this? Oh, sorry, Ruth.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just ask one more question of Jane. On the disposals of empty property, I mean, I very much hope the ones in the south of the county aren't disposed of because they've been empty for 2 years and they're desperately needed. But when they are disposed of, do housing associations have a duty to offer them to local people first, or can they just put them on the open market?
Housing associations don't have a duty to offer them to local people first. However, they do have to have a conversation with the local authority, with us as the Strategic Housing Authority, about their intentions to dispose. So it gives us the opportunity to intervene and find out what they are doing and what the rationale is. One of the things we do try and do is to find out if there are any other social housing providers who might want to take that stock on, because sometimes it might be because, for example, they don't have other stock in the vicinity, so it's more expensive for them to manage and maintain than it would be otherwise, that kind of rationale. So it's something that we do scrutinise and try and find solutions to, but certainly in terms of disposal in the local area rather than taking it to auction, for example, is something that we would like to see them doing as part of their just good practice.
So does this tie back in probably to the conversation, for example, Star are thinking of increasing their remit and sort of geography, and I guess others do the same now and again and review those? No, that's fine. Any other questions? So we're joined by someone from Age UK who technically is probably not a member of the committee, but if you would like to ask,
I can ask after the meeting.
You can ask. Absolutely fine. I'm sure Jane would be happy to speak after the meeting. So if we're happy with that one, the working group will form a working group. They'll meet, go through this, look at any things and bring it back to the rest of the committee for the next meeting, along with whatever results come back from the public consultation. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next item, item 8, which is the economic growth plan. So I think it's Tracy Dark and Hayley you're going to be presenting. If I can just get you to introduce yourselves, just in case anybody else is watching online before you start. But Tracy, I think you're probably going to introduce this, are you, or is it Hayley?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Chair. So just really to just give a very, very quick introduction to the report, and then I'll hand over to Hayley, who is the lead officer that's been leading on all this sort of consultation strategy. This report is the report which is the refresh of the economic growth strategy, which expired in 2021 effectively. And of course, we've had COVID in between, so we thought it was the right thing to do, just to sort of pause it and then start the process again, which was launched in November, and that is to review the strategy to take it from 2022 to 2027. And of course, the reason for that, just that short pause, was to just understand the impact on the economy around COVID. I think it makes complete sense. And what we've done and what the team have done is to start that consultation process, so engaging on the back of all the information we've gathered pre-COVID and during COVID, working with the economic task force to gather all that information together, and then to start launching into consultations with our business communities and all our stakeholders that are involved and input into the strategy. The report is an evolving thing. We are hoping to, and Hayley will go through the timelines, but we're hoping to have a draft strategy in spring. Of course, we're in spring now, but shortly, and that document will then go out through a wholesale consultation process. The purpose of coming back to this scrutiny committee today was that we were asked to do so by place overview scrutiny, and to give you as members the opportunity of knowing when you can input into that consultation exercise. So I'll hand over to Hayley, and apologise for the size of me on the screen. Not a lot I can do about that. So Hayley.
Thank you, thanks Tracy. So I'm Hayley Owen, Growth Programme and Strategy Manager. We put together some slides today, sorry I'm behind you. I put together some slides today to sort of hopefully bring this to life a little bit and give you some overview, as Tracy said, of sort of the journey we've been on so far, a little summary of current performance of the previous strategy, work done to date and the next steps. So moving on, thank you. Great. So we took a report to Cabinet in 21 in January, which really was about summarising the work done to date to manage the sort of impacts of COVID, to update members on kind of the economics sort of landscape at that point, Brexit and the flooding, and really set out kind of sort of the picture that we were dealing with from an economic perspective in Shropshire, but also to get the mandate to go out and sort of wholesale review the economics of growth strategy, and take that forward very much in collaboration with our partners. This is a Shropshire economic growth strategy, not a Shropshire Council one. Obviously, we're a key partner and driver in that, but as we discuss further, hopefully, the picture and the landscape with our stakeholders and business community will become apparent. So, thank you. So this is just to give some headlines, really, of an economic task force which came about in 2020. When the pandemic hit, two task forces set up by the council, one around economic recovery and one around social task force, which has been led and chaired by Councillor Potter, who sat here today. And this has brought together the kind of key partners, stakeholders, businesses within Shropshire who have an influence and have at the time actually serious issues that we need to coordinate and manage together. So the task force very immediately had an immediate purpose of supporting each other, supporting the businesses and supporting the people in Shropshire through this really very challenging economic picture. So the task force has been fundamental in coordinating and very data driven from the start, in terms of collecting data, tracking information, monitoring trends. So that really important evidence base which informs everything that we're looking to do and drive forward now. So the task force has been used in its current form to help shape the strategy going forward, and the information that we've heard through the pandemic and through our networks to sort of shape and drive forward the next steps of the strategy development. but as with all good strategy, you need to take that review of how we've performed against our previous strategy, as Tracy said, which ran to 21. Obviously, we're still working on that strategy, and they don't stop in a moment in time, but it's where we've got to when we came to the review point at the end of last year. So as you can see, don't need to explain to yourselves, it's been probably the most challenging two and a half years for business and for employment, through the Brexit impacts which we're monitoring, also COVID. So I think overall, and there were some links within the report that you could have more detail on. The picture we performed, I think, fairly well in Shropshire actually in terms of our performance. GVA sort of middling really, which is always a challenging one to measure in itself. In terms of jobs, a small decrease and number of furlough numbers, which we're still monitoring and managing that as we go forward. An increase in terms of private sector investment, which is fantastic, and obviously homes delivery at huge levels. So really importantly that we have that snapshot and that look and that performance review to help us sort of shape again going forward how we start to think about those kind of key KPIs and measures that we're looking for through this strategy review. And again, this slide, which I hope you can see, I think I might need glasses, is around trying to make sure in terms of aligning with wider council priorities. So obviously the Shropshire Plan is that kind of golden thread that we all need to be working through with all strategies across the council, and the economic strategy really alongside the local plan. How do we make sure that this isn't just a single strategy that will deliver all the economic sort of outputs. This needs to be linked in amongst all the other strategies that the council has. We've heard a lot about the housing strategy today in terms of delivery, in terms of the kind of climate emergency, working very much around our culture and heritage, working through the place plans. So and transport and infrastructure. So it's really to give that picture and assurance to you in terms of that coordination. So we've worked very closely with a series of internal workshops with council departments to ensure that alignment of what we're all trying to achieve. And I think the timing with the Shropshire Plan has been really helpful for the economic growth strategy review to ensure that golden thread runs through these plans and strategies going forward. So this slide really is the first one in terms of the kind of principles and core values that have been established so far for the economic growth strategy. The task force has helped shape these, and this has come through very much from the data that's driven the development of the strategy so far. So as this progressed, sort of the feedback we had through business, through partners, is around the principles of what the strategy is trying to achieve. These are sort of implicit, cross-cutting, any of those words that we like to use to sort of embedded within the plan in terms of the resilience. Really fantastic resilience in our business community, and I think that's been apparent through the pandemic, and actually ensuring that we have a plan that is resilient, that is flexible, that can adapt and change is more important than ever, and that's been a really strong theme that we've heard loud and clear from our business community. Sustainability, without question, obviously, is implicit in this plan, and that needs to make sure that it's capturing that throughout all of the key themes that we'll come on to shortly. Inclusivity and the health and wellbeing agenda. So it's really just putting those at the forefront of the plan, ensuring that they're embedded in the strategy going forward and in the action plan as we develop that. So key themes, again, working very much with the task force and looking back at our previous strategy and looking forward. These are kind of formed around supporting local business, our strategic locations and employment skills. And working from these, we've started to shape up some more sort of key points that emerge from this. So we held a workshop, as Tracy said, in November last year, where we called together our key partners, stakeholders, business community. Over 90 people attended that. We also invited chairs from scrutiny committees to attend, and it was online and it was in person to ensure that we got the best sort of involvement we could. it was very good, well, good feedback from that event in terms of people really feeling they had ownership and were able to help shape how this develops going forward. And I suppose coming back to the point around this being a plan that, you know, this isn't only Shropshire Council that can deliver this. We don't have the control over all these elements by any stretch, and it really needs to be a plan that people, communities and businesses recognise as their own. So I was just going to talk a little bit through the key themes. So the first being sort of supporting local businesses, and the key findings and the feedback that we've had through the engagement so far has really been around providing sort of comprehensive business support services, resilience planning, something that came up very strongly, debt management, accessing to funding and finance, and supporting businesses with new and existing employment markets and sectors. So really understanding our sectors a little bit further and really sort of get the evidence behind our sort of sector focuses as well for the future. Supporting business workforce and wellbeing was a huge kind of point that's come out through the conversations we've been having, and I think businesses, you know, who are very good at this, but actually really understanding that they need to make sure their staff are resilient in that sense. They're providing those packages of support. So that was something quite new coming forward as being a really important point through this business support. And businesses to adopt sort of corporate social responsibilities, and how do they do that in the most effective way for the benefit of Shropshire, and sort of facilitators of sector growth to support supply chains as well. So that sort of supply chain growth in our local business and our local economy. So they were kind of the key headlines that came out through that theme. And strategic locations. So the kind of through the workshop we had and through the task force comments, you know, our market towns are kind of the lifeblood of Shropshire, as we know, and actually the opportunity around town centre resilience and healthy towns, even more apparent, I think, through the pandemic, how we will, you know, return to our sort of market towns and our towns for sort of goods and uses, but actually how we use our towns has really changed over this period as well. And I think actually, you know, we always, and we're ensuring in terms of local employment and local jobs, but actually those green spaces, that health and well-being, the resilience of our towns is even stronger. And I think the comments that came out around how that functions for Shropshire is critical. So I suppose market towns opportunities and growth is something that we're very aware of. Investment in infrastructure, a huge point really by one bullet, but infrastructure just came out loud and clear in terms of the right infrastructure, the cost of infrastructure, and what that means in terms of movement of people, improved connectivity is part of that, getting people to jobs, how we support that, you know, and the links across all these themes are just so apparent. Attracting inward investment for obvious reasons in terms of the sort of the growth of businesses and where they're looking to locate. I think Shropshire in its position at the moment is a lot of people are looking to either relocate their business, able to work from home, don't need to move to do the business they want to do, are thinking very much about their staff and their well-being and where they want to locate and grow their businesses. So in terms of Shropshire's positioning in that, I think is very strong, and lots of the feedback from the market was along those lines of, and you'll all be aware of this, but you know, housing demand is huge, and commercial growth of opportunities and office demand. It's something unprecedented that we've seen in Shropshire in the last 18 months, 2 years, in terms of inquiries and looking for that space within the county, which is very encouraging. And sustainably connected communities, including sort of housing provision and allocation. So this was all coming about, you know, where are those key locations within the county? Where are we trying to attract what business, and how do we support those areas to sort of be resilient, to grow and to prosper for the economy of Shropshire? And employment and skills. as you would expect, supporting those pathways to employment and progression, improvement in learning and employment outcomes, particularly as we know for our sort of 16 to 24s and our over 55. So a huge kind of rise in sort of a programme called Silverpreneurs, which the Growth Hub have been running, of people wanting to start new businesses and grow that kind of knowledge within the county, and that not sort of knowledge sharing. So that's been a really impressive programme that's been run by the Growth Hub around that kind of sharing of information and knowledge and supporting each other. But actually, and actually for our economy, that's really quite exciting in terms of continuing that sort of working age population and bringing that kind of, what Shropshire has a great wealth of is that kind of skills and knowledge, and it's about kind of ensuring that we don't lose that, and we can pass that on to younger generations. So that's really quite an exciting piece. Develop skills and productive workforce through that upskilling, reskilling and transferable skills. As we know, Shropshire hasn't got huge levels of unemployment, it's more about underemployment, and how do we actually develop that, you know, for the benefit of people within Shropshire, that low wage economy. So how do we sort of break some of that cycle? So that was kind of loud and clear through our sort of skills providers, but also those kind of education, working with the university and the colleges, and lots of kind of really quite exciting ways of sort of rethinking about some of those sort of skills budgets and how we start to do that a little more effectively, and pushing for those sorts of things. And recruitment and retention of staff and people for work within Shropshire has always been a challenge about commuting, but it's really interesting to watch the trend now of the home working, and what people are starting to do over the next 18 months, 2 years, in terms of whether people go back to offices or stay as they are in Shropshire. And I think that's something we need to keep a close watch on. So those are the kind of key findings and themes and feedback we had through the event, which has been really, really important in helping us to shape up how we develop this strategy going forward. So some cross sort of cutting themes that came out of this that we took away as headlines, and we tested these back on the day as well. We're really around that digital connectivity remains critical to the Shropshire economy. And we've got a fantastic programme at the moment in terms of rolling out to the broadband, 5G, etc., through the Connecting Shropshire programme. But actually, you know, more than ever, it just became so apparent how important our digital connectivity remains in that rurality of Shropshire. So we heard that loud and clear from the businesses and from our partners. Transport connectivity for employment, learning and leisure opportunities is a necessity. So it's the simple thing of somebody getting a job, but actually within the first 2 weeks they can't afford to get to the job, which may be 10 miles down the road, public transport, etc. These are all kind of those barriers to work, and I think it's just you know, not losing sight of that and the wider impacts in terms of transport connectivity. The green agenda and providing that sort of massive opportunity to position Shropshire nationally. So, you know, where we are in terms of solar power generation, where we can be in terms of that sort of green and digital recovery piece. So that was something that we obviously need to understand what that really means for us in terms of where we sit and what our offer is. But I think what we were hearing was that the market was saying Shropshire's sort of in a good place to kind of take advantage of this and its positioning. Employees sort of placing greater emphasis on their work location now with remote working, and businesses, as I said before, making that option about where they locate, and that's sort of why Shropshire being stronger message than ever. So that whole piece that sits around why you choose to live where you do, and what the offer is in terms of a wider package for families, for businesses, is critical. And I think Shropshire has a huge amount to offer in that sector, and so that came out very strongly. And maximising, I suppose, our position. You know, we're adjacent to Wales, North Wales, West Midlands, that cross-border opportunities, and really, I suppose, you know, deciding how we're going to kind of maximise the opportunities we get with our neighbours, and how we make best benefit of our sort of boundaries. And unlocking and communicating sort of in-demand skills shortages and upskill requirements, and what businesses need and what's available, and how quickly our kind of we can respond to that as a county to provide those skills, and so that local labour, local skills piece is critical, working with the schools and colleges and the university going forward. So they were the key points that we heard, we tested back, and were sort of agreed by the people at that session going forward. And I suppose the next slide is really about the key asks from the businesses to the task force and to the council, were around affordable housing provision for younger people starting out and those wanting to work in the county, and those investment opportunities for businesses and individuals to contribute to the growth in Shropshire economy, especially within the green and sustainable sectors. And networks with like-minded business owners, an opportunity to develop new clusters. So we do quite a lot of this already through the Growth Hub actually, and the Growth Hub are now sort of out on the move more in terms of getting out to some of those market towns in the programme. So some of these things are things we do but actually can be expanded upon. Infrastructure sort of underpins all our aspirations, needs to be investment in sustainable infrastructure. And then another question sort of asked was around clarity around skills and training needs of businesses, both now and in the future. And I guess fundamentally engagement with younger generations, sort of future-proof our strategies and their asks and wants going forward. So that was kind of really great feedback for us, and is really actually shaping how we take this forward in the work that we're looking at in terms of developing the strategy. So moving on in terms of the next steps then, we are working with, as the paper sets out, University Centre Shrewsbury, who are helping in terms of developing some of the sort of workings of evidence base with us, also some sort of modelling around the vision, and also helping us to sort of really shape up our thoughts and processes around the action plan that will come out of this as the programme develops. So the next steps are is to identify the vision for the 22-27 plan, to pursue the current themes and values, to prioritise the key asks identified in the workshops, and sort of and continue work really around the sort of governance and management and monitoring of the plan going forward, including the development of KPIs as well. So this is in terms of, how are we going to manage and monitor this plan on an ongoing basis? Where does the plan sort of report to in terms of the task force and in terms of council and scrutiny review? Because I think this isn't something we have control over all of those outcomes, and I think we need to make sure that we regularly kind of have that oversight of how this plan is developing, and we take stock on an annual basis. So as Tracy alluded to, the strategy is looking to be sort of drafted and ready for spring. So when we say spring, we probably mean May, maybe June, and then looking to take that forward for consultation over the summer period. So we have a finalised plan sort of coming to the end of the summer. And thank you. I think that's all from me, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Hayley and Tracy. So I will open it up to any questions. Just noting from the report, there is a suggestion of this could come back to this committee at each stage before it goes to cabinet or council at each stage. So I think that's something we'll probably look to take them up on. But has anybody got any questions based on what they've heard? So Julian.
Thank you. Yeah, a couple of questions, a couple of observations, and a suggestion, I suppose. I think the first question is about the resilience issue. It is interesting that there does seem to be a story that Shropshire has been fairly resilient, and is that to do with the dominance of SMEs, of smaller businesses? Certainly in terms of hospitality, from what I can see, it seems to have been the case in Shrewsbury that it's the independents and the smaller ones which have actually survived, and we've lost some of the chains. So I'm just wondering if that's true in other sectors as well. Because if it is true, then that has implications in terms of sort of economic strategy we have. The second one is just it's a bit of a moan. So the economic task force, I noticed, doesn't have anybody on it from Zero Carbon Shropshire, and there is real expertise in there on supporting businesses moving towards zero carbon, and also talking about, you know, the skills agenda around green energy and retrofit and all that sort of stuff. So I would implore you to invite them to be part of the task force. The sort of the bigger thing is just in terms of shape of what sort of economic strategy we want. So I've talked about this before, but the community wealth building concept is the core of it is the idea that we use our procurement and we talk to anchor institutions, so other big players in the local economy, to get them to really shape their procurement around supporting local businesses and local small businesses. And that means that you have to have really easy, accessible procurement frameworks. You have to have bite-sized contracts. And we talked about this when it comes to roads, for example, and all sorts of other things. And I just want some assurance, or I'd be interested to know if you think that's right, and if we can move in that sort of direction. Because that feels to me to be the right way to support an economy which is already largely populated by smaller firms. The next point is just in terms of the skills audit. You know, do we know? Because part of the problem of having a strategy based on bringing together the existing businesses, which I was at that event, and it was a great event. But we also need to be thinking about where the economy goes, and that isn't necessarily going to come from the existing businesses. We do know that there is, to go back to the retrofit story, that we desperately need to do something about the fact we have the leakiest homes in the developed world, and that people's bills are terrible, and that we need to decarbonise our heating. And that's a whole industry which at the moment we simply haven't got going, and we need to understand that, and we need to be talking to the skills providers, the training providers, about how we get that going. And the final bit, I'll just throw in this story actually related to that. So how do you get that long-term supply chain confidence? So I took the opportunity, as currently being mayor in Shrewsbury, I was at Shrewsbury School. Now they've got quite a lot of buildings, and I gave them a friendly challenge. If they were to say, yes, we're going to decarbonise the heating in our buildings over the next 5, 6, 7 years, that in itself will wake up a lot of local firms to think, oh yeah, no, we'll get skilled up in that, because there's a lot of money there. And I just think we need to be talking to both doing it through our own housing providers, but also with other anchor institutions, really beginning to get that agenda going. And I'm hoping that will be at the heart of it. Final thing is, again, going back to another little bit of a moan. So on the place overview committee, we did call for a bit of a workshop, so to give all members the opportunity to really have a think about the type of economic future that Shropshire has, and we haven't seen anything like that. We have seen the one for businesses, but I would really welcome the opportunity for members more widely to really do some, use a horrible term, some blue skies thinking about sort of the economic direction that the council takes, before we're sort of into the game of reviewing existing documents, which is always when things get a bit less imaginative, perhaps. Thanks.
Okay, Hayley, I think you've come back on those. I think that was one of the things that is sitting here. It's an opportunity for this committee. Certainly, you're at the stage of developing the strategy. It's whether the committee's minded they want to get involved with this stage and developing your action plan and give some feedback on that, I suppose. And that rolls into Julian's point. Obviously, there's a role once it's adopted, but I don't know if you want to pick up that and Julian's other points.
Yes, I think I've noted them, so I'll try and go through them, Julian. Your point about resilience and SMEs is a huge base of our business economy, is predominantly made up with SMEs. So I think the way that they've been able to adapt their business plans, they've been able to be quite fleet of foot in terms of simple things like collection. That you're trying to remember all those phases we went through, but when businesses could turn to doing click and collect, when they could do deliveries. So we saw a huge amount of seemingly small scale actually massively important for those businesses in terms of how they did that. But also I think the entrepreneurial spirit of Shropshire really shone through. So we saw actually a lot of new businesses opening up through the pandemic. Different, you know, this isn't saying everyone's been a good story, because obviously there's been some really terrible, you know, hard hit businesses, but lots of people taking that opportunity to provide either new services within their existing business or seeing opportunities within the pandemic to offer different kind of nuances to their current business or grow a new arm of businesses. So I think that sort of entrepreneurial and new starting kind of businesses, and especially through some of the growth organisations, has been really encouraging. So I think, you know, it's not all positive news, but I do think the businesses have really kind of adapted very well and are used to kind of changing their business model quite quickly. And I think that is something, the strength of the Shropshire economy through that SME base is quite impressive. The point around the zero carbon involvement in the task force is something I can pick up. Obviously, I've got Councillor Ed Potter, who's the chair, so we can pick that up as a point for the task force to consider, Ed. And then the community wealth, I think, is a really interesting point, actually, Julie. Something I've done quite a bit of reading around myself, and we'll pick that up with Nigel Denton around shaping those procurement and accessibilities, because I think that's something that when we were at the event, and I know some conversations I'd had with people, is around accessing some of those larger contracts, and how do we get that down to the tier 2, 3 providers that can access and provide that local skills base. So that's something I'm very interested in. I think that the economic strategy should have a line to that, and we can work with our colleagues in procurement. So I'll take that away as an action. I think the other bit was around a skills audit and the training, and I think it was interesting in terms of, I'm trying to remember the exact training of what you were saying there, sorry. I was just thinking it was around the business support and that training, and I think the providers, and I think working with the college. So I know that James Staniforth was in attendance at the event and had some quite interesting thoughts around that, and working with the university at the moment quite closely around this kind of skills mapping that needs to go over the top of this as well. So I think they're all really valid and helpful points. Alongside that sort of importance of the supply chain, I think that clustering, that really understanding what we mean by that when it comes to skills and our sectors and our growth. And do we need, you know, are we looking at some sort of knowledge hub outlets from universities to support some of this growth? Are we talking about genuinely, you know, looking at what sectors we start to encourage into particular towns and parts of the council, or is it more that virtual network of that sector and supply chain support that we need to develop? So I haven't got the answers to those, but I think they're really important things that we do reflect in this going forward. And the place overview, I'm not sure I know what, so I'm not aware of that as a point, so I'll have to pick that up. It might be something Daniel was going to come in on the last point. Thank you.
Okay, I think Tracy's indicated, I don't know if we're not using the slide presentation, do we want to knock that bit off? And then I didn't see Tracy, so I don't know if you want to go next, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Don't worry, because Hayley's picked up most of the points really that I wanted to cover. There was I think the point Julian said about the procurement bit is really important. You know, so making the business to business bit for local businesses to be able to work through the procurement process as easy as possible is really, really important. And I know our procurement team are looking at that, and it's sort of an ongoing thing. It's listening to businesses, feeding that back to us to make sure that they have opportunities. So again, that's sort of quite high on the agenda. The skills audit bit as well. It's just being aware of, you know, through COVID pandemic, the team that works alongside Hayley's team, so that's our inward investment and business support team headed by Matt Potts, has been completely taken over to and drafted into delivering the £170 million worth of business grants during COVID pandemic, and that's just coming to a close at the 1st of April this year. So the whole bit about skills audit is something that was very much in Matt's mind at the beginning of COVID pandemic, but actually we have now, through some funding, we're going to be bringing in a new post that will be able to do a lot of that skill support. So which I think will be really helpful. So that's sort of something new, Julian, and we'll work closely with training providers. It's not to say that we haven't tried some of that already, and it is quite hard to get the right, you know, for the colleges, the right courses in line with some of the sort of skills that need to be developed, but I think that's something, and I give an example of that where we've spoken, you know, when we've spoken to the colleges, for example, about needing to skill up people on digital delivery, you know, working with, for example, Airband, who's one of our suppliers, they could take a cohort of people, you know, they're employing people month by month, and they said, you know, if there was that supply of people coming through on courses, they could probably take a whole cohort themselves. Yet speaking to the colleges, they'll say, well, we run IT courses. Well, of course, it's not IT at all. It's a completely different thing. So getting the providers doing the right courses to bring people through is really important. And then that also works with the, you mentioned about leaky homes and high bills and getting anchor institutes, you know, it links in with the work that Jane presented to the committee earlier. But again, the construction industry is really struggling around, you know, rising prices of materials, bringing people in to skill them up, shortage of staff, and we're seeing it in the hospitality sector as well. So we're looking at whatever innovative ways through this strategy to try and help to support those industries. And then just finally on bringing the whole workshop and the economic sort of future for members, it needs to be through this process, and we need to take this strategy through our normal sort of strategy process, and there will be the opportunity through the consultation process for Hayley to be able to do that with members if that's something that they choose. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. David. Thank you, Chair. Lots of points I'm going to raise have been covered already, but just small point really about looking at the specialisms which are currently concentrated in certain areas. I'm chair of the Climate Change Committee on the Shropshire Town Council. I'm always struck by the number of experts we seem to have locally who advise people throughout the UK, and the number of professional based consultancies in Shrewsbury. I wonder whether there is a part of the strategy you should be looking at current sort of specialism, specialist businesses we have here, professional type, particularly consultant type businesses which you have here, which could be attracted and expanded and developed. Because I think Shrewsbury and the rest of Shropshire is a very attractive place to live, particularly in the current climate when people are considering moving out of the big cities. And I wonder whether that's a theme maybe that should be in the economic strategy. The other thing is just related to, I mean, you talked about the visitor economy, which is very, very important. And I think increasingly, obviously, the experiential side of things, you know, developing opportunities for people to take part in kind of arts-based festivals, all sorts of things like that, which are developing locally in Shropshire. But I wonder whether that's something that should be a theme running through the economic strategy, because the attractiveness of Shropshire is a place to visit and come to and live. Perhaps we should be looking at those areas to develop as well. And lastly, just on the agricultural side, obviously there's a lot of businesses which are based on agriculture and the fantastic resources we have in Shropshire, and you look at the success of the market hall in Shrewsbury, for example, and the number of local providers and based there, and whether, you know, that also is an element which needs to be developed and encouraged.
Okay, I don't know, Hayley, do you want to come back?
Yeah, thank you. All really good points, Councillor. And I think the element around the specialisms is something we'll look at when we do a lot of running of the evidence of all those sort of sectors and our employment levels within them. And as you can imagine, sort of consultancies and service level is good in Shropshire, and we perform above national average on that. And I think that breakdown of those businesses is something we can look at when we get to that action plan development, to kind of, and it comes into that. supply chain and sector development, doesn't it, and supporting networks. So I think that's a really useful point, and something we can look at in more detail. On the task force we have Visit Shropshire, and we have got, you know, in terms of that developing of the kind of destination management side of work. So Andrea Fox and Claire Featherstone's team are really working on understanding the kind of brand identity of Shropshire, and then I guess within that strategy document we need to ensure that we pull that through, and particularly, as Tracy said, working with the investment team, because that is such an important part and such a big offer for Shropshire. But actually the experience, as you said, experience when you're here, and experience is what we all live by and how we live and function in society, isn't it? And that market town experience we're talking about, and how that all comes together. So I suppose I haven't got answers to those, more just yes, I think that is really important. I think we agree with that. I think it's linking, and I think the destination management work is really exciting at the moment, and understanding how Shropshire's going to sort of position. And obviously Shrewsbury's done quite a lot itself in the big town plan and through the place narrative. Oswestry's moving forward in terms of future Oswestry and what it's trying to identify itself as being and trying to attract. And I think working with our other market towns around that, you know, there is so many differences in our market towns, but as Shropshire as a whole, we need to market ourselves more collectively as well. So I think, you know, all really useful points. I think we can pick up that visitor thread through the plan, and through some of the deliverables of that maybe picked up in other strategies as well. But I think it's those important bits around the economy and the role it provides. And as we said, our base around hospitality and leisure is huge in Shropshire, and a huge employer. But it is that seasonal work and all those things that you said. And I think the last point you said around agri-tech and agriculture, again, so we had a representative from the NFUs on the task force, and some of the feedback and the challenges, and the way we've been able to work through the task force to help support some of those challenges coming out through Brexit, some of those challenges now facing around fuel and labour supplies. These aren't small things that can be solved, and we haven't got all the answers to those, but I think our agri-tech sector and how we support that, and actually across kind of geographies as well, working quite, you know, with Hereford and others, some of these impacts are something that we need to collectively be coordinating through to government as well. So yes, all great points really. I think thank you, noted, and we'll look to pick those up as we develop the strategy. Thank you.
Just one quick question. You mentioned sort of digital connectivity runs through it all and so on. I'm aware sort of, I think performance management picks up connecting Shropshire and that side of it, but is there any role within, is there any additional work you can see of things that will need to be done in terms of delivering this economic plan? I'm just wondering whether they should, where and they'd be picked up.
Yeah, I think that's a part of that, and then I think maybe Tracy might want to come in on more of that. But the digital piece is something we're talking to Chris Taylor, who leads the sort of Connecting Shropshire closely, because we're looking at what sort of subgroups we need to start to form. We don't want to run ahead until we get a little bit further with the strategy, but there needs to be some subgroups that sit under the strategy around some of these key kind of objectives that we're going to be looking at. And I think the digital piece is so huge and cross-cutting in terms of what it can achieve, but how it's delivered isn't necessarily through one forum, through all those networks of bringing together people. So I suppose the short answer is, I think we don't really necessarily need to define what we mean by that digital kind of economy piece and green connectivity for Shropshire. So we are going to start with Chris and colleagues to start to put together a working group to develop that sort of ask and that sort of Shropshire ask a little bit further, Chair. So I think that's something we can obviously update on at the next meeting as well. But in terms of where that reporting through performance scrutiny, I think Tracy may want to come in on that one.
Okay, Tracy.
Thank you. I think the whole thing about the digital bit is that sort of whole you know, development of, as Hayley says, connecting Shropshire, but also how 5G is developing. And just having come from an event yesterday, which was actually all about 5G and innovation, you can see how fast the industry is moving, and every day new technology is coming, and there's opportunities, I think, for places like Shropshire, because you know it is really important where we've got black spots where businesses communities are really struggling, you know, to just have broadband, and we need to really home in on that. So that's absolutely the work that that Chris Taylor is involved with. And, you know, just to give a light-hearted sort of moment, really, where yesterday I was seeing, you know, the robots that actually deliver drinks to tables, you know, so actually helping the hospitality sector with, you know, the whole massive shortage of staff. We cannot get enough staff in the hospitality sector, and, you know, there is innovation out there that is starting to look at how it can bridge some of those gaps. So it's about how we embrace technology. I think is a fascinating sort of area, but you know, that's as we develop sort of 5G. I think in terms of the strategy, though, you know, these elements around the visitor economy, agri-tech, hospitality, this is about this strategy wrapping around that, and not just being, as Hayley said at the very beginning, not just a council strategy. This is, you know, our business communities. This is the economic growth strategy for Shropshire, and this is about all our partners working with us. So we just need to be careful that we're facilitators as well in this. We're not delivering all of this as a council, so we're expecting everybody to step up to the plate and take the strategy forward. And then there's the whole thing about that performance measures. So the action plan that will flow from the strategy will be the measures that can come back to scrutiny committees to ensure that we're on track and we're delivering the outcomes of the strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ruth?
Thank you, Chair. And just Tracy's comments are just sort of fall onto my question, really. You know, I think the strategy is well overdue. We need it. It's really important for Shropshire. Pleased to see it's a 5-year strategy, but just how quickly will those deliverables happen? And there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, like, you know, south of the county, we need affordable housing, we need care and support workers and key workers who are traditionally lower paid, they can't afford to buy a house or rent anywhere. So just how is that going to happen quickly, really, to, you know, to boost the economy and meet the needs of local people?
Let's pick that one up.
I think in terms of an answer to that question, I think it's around ensuring that we continue to work through this partnership is so important, because then we're all able, you know, I think part of this going forward is about the accountability of the delivery plan and the actions. So ensuring that we have, as Tracy and I have both kind of said at length, really, this is about things that Shropshire Council can do, but it's about what all of those partners can deliver and how we collectively do that. And I think having a joined up space where we meet, we hold each other to account on how we're performing against that, we update, we help with blockers, we move things forward, or we understand what the challenges are, and if some of these things are not going to move at that pace, we're aware of that and we can start to intervene or realign what we're trying to achieve if actually that isn't going to bring us the outcomes we need. So I think in answer to the question, I think we need to ensure that we continue to work in that space, because I think that's where the most value will come and we'll be able to achieve the most in that coordination. Otherwise, you know, you don't, 2 or 3 years passes and we're not quite sure where we are in terms of performance of these things. So I think that's the approach we're taking in terms of kind of ensuring that our partners and ourselves are working to the same kind of outcomes, Councillor.
Okay. I'm just conscious of time a little bit. I'm not picking up that we're looking to make any fundamental recommendations other than this is due to go forward and going for a consultation. I do note Julian's point about if members can be folded into this process at an earlier rather than later stage, if that's feasible. But this would come back to us after the first round of consultation. That come back to this committee, or is it a bit prior to that?
I think that's probably a question we'd like to ask yourselves, really. Obviously, we'd be looking to take a draft to Cabinet to go out to consult, and as currently worded, we bring it through the committee first. If that aligned with your work plan, I think yes.
Happy with that? In terms of work plan, Daniel, that's not causing us any...
No, not at all, Chair.
You may see us relatively soon.
Okay, right, we will assume we'll see that relatively soon, but yeah.
I just wonder whether there's a role for doing that as a joint place, and I'm being selfish here, so I can get in on it in part, but we have discussed this stuff in place. I wonder if there's a role for it to be a joint meeting.
If we agree, it'll come back to this one, and then I can have a conversation with others. And Andy, you've got.
I would suggest a far easier route to that, Chair, would be for you just to invite interested elected members to participate in your committees that there's a number wants to do. It just saves admin time in agendas, papers, and achieves the same purpose in the end.
Yeah. Okay, happy then. Yeah, on this item, we'll advertise it to others to say we are welcome to come and contribute. Okay. Right, that's fine. Thank you very much. We look forward to seeing the draft then in that case. Right, moving on. Item 9 is Blue Badge online applications. You'll have had, I think it came through yesterday in the end, just a quick note about Blue Badge applications. Age UK are raising some concerns about the current process and the online only nature of it, which they've detailed in the report. I think Robert Smith is with us from Age UK. I think we've got Francis Darling as well from the officer side as well, that deals with the applications. So I don't know who we want to speak first. Have we got a preference? I mean, we've had the thing circulated from Age UK. I don't know, Robert, do you want to just give a little intro to what was circulated to us, and then Francis, I'll bring you in to speak about it from the service point of view. Okay. Yeah. You press the right hand button.
Yeah. Yeah. Everyone hear me? Okay. Yeah. I'm Robert Smith, Information Advice Manager at Age UK. I've been with Age UK Shropshire Decarbonisation for 10 years, where we've provided lots of support around inquiries, around information and advice. And over those 10 years, I'd say roughly between 300 and 400 people a year come to us with assistance with the Blue Badge application form. So for the first sort of few years of working with Age UK, a lot of those were on paper applications. We had a team of volunteers that supported people in the community to complete those paper applications and submit them to the council, provide all the necessary supporting documents and make sure that they're all processed, processed in a quality and efficient manner, really, and make sure that people that are eligible get their blue badges. I'd say just before the pandemic, the council, obviously, in relation to their digital strategy, realised that processing 5,000 odd paper applications a year has an economic cost to it and also an environmental cost to it. And there was a shift to making the Blue Badge online process a digital by default service. So, as I say, this was just before the pandemic when paper applications became a little bit more was sort of phased out, and the council strategy was to persuade everybody to claim online. Subsequently, our volunteer task force that did paper applications in the community didn't felt they were suitably skilled to do the online applications in the community, so we sort of lost our volunteer task force, and Age UK, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, couldn't really recruit new volunteers to support people in the community. So we did lose a bit of community support that we were able to provide at the time. And also the pandemic obviously accelerated closing of local hubs for the council, where face-to-face support with applications was provided, and another number of other means that that the council could support people face-to-face. So really this paper was just talking about our experiences of the difficulties older people in particular experienced, the 300 to 400 people have experienced in getting their blue badges over the course of the last 2 years. We've kept a watching brief of people that have approached us for support with a blue badge application. And whereas before, when we supported people with the paper applications, around 9 out of 10 got a blue badge at the end of our support, the watching brief has led to us having only 30% of people having a blue badge at the end of us speaking to them a few months after they've approached us. So we feel that this is quite an equality issue, and we feel that we need just to bring it to scrutiny, because we feel that unfortunately, due to the pandemic and other reasons, that our operational links with the Blue Badge team, it hasn't been as cooperative as we would like. So hence why we've reported to scrutiny, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we appreciate you bringing it to our attention. So I'll ask Francis to come in, and then I'll look out to members. So Francis.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for bringing me to the meeting. Right, the information that's been shared in both verbally now and in the report are based on conversations that we've been having with Age UK. Actually started really just before the pandemic hit, so there's nothing that's there that's new in terms of my sort of personal sort of knowledge and information and the team's concerns around it. The shift across to that more digital platform was driven really for two reasons, and it was before the pandemic. The Department for Transport, who are actually the agency for which we are their agents in effect as a local authority, but the DFT, Department of Transport, decentralised the whole process, and we were required to go down this route with that government body. The approach actually has helped us hugely through the pandemic. If we were still with the paper system that existed beforehand, then the backlogs that we would have now would really be significantly more. Well, we don't really have actual backlogs in terms of normal applications. It's absolutely recognised that there are people out there that Age UK colleagues represent, as we will all know in our own families, where younger people have to step in and help because of the lack of ability with technology. I think as time goes on, that will shift, and I think we've got a situation currently where we're in that generational move, but I think we have to really understand and accept that the world is going to be driven hugely by technology, even more so going forward. And we've got this transition where there are people that will struggle to be supported as we would like. And this is exactly the point I think that Age UK is making, and I do understand it. National Age UK, interestingly, are very sort of clear on their website and so on around acknowledging that local authorities will direct people to the digital world and the online processes. Acknowledging also that there are some who will not provide any paper options, but you have to speak to your own, the individual council as somebody who wants a blue badge. But nationally, the organisation does recognise that direction of travel. Locally, I know that the pandemic has restricted the hubs and the access for people to go to places, and that won't come as news to anybody in the room. My understanding is that the council is absolutely committed to a hub process or hubs being available in the future, along with that mobile bus or something equivalent that will take to those particular areas that have got greater need for that individual support, and people will be able to access that. Hopefully in the not too distant future. It is tied up with the moving out of COVID and the restrictions being completely lifted, and embedding that facility back into the community, both at static sites and mobile sites. In terms of the sort of numbers involved, we had a quick look at sort of so for example, over the last 3 years, the number of, so this is obviously not directly connected to the people who've gone to Age UK, but overall, we are getting around about 5,000 to 5,500 applications each year, and that has remained reasonably static. It's increased a little bit because of the additional hidden disabilities applications, but on the whole, we're still getting that sort of numbers. And of that, 800 or so start an application, but it's never completed because of not providing the information that's needed. Some of them just don't at all, and also for non-payment. So in terms of the sort of data that Age UK have got around why that doesn't proceed to a final badge produced, I certainly would want to get under the skin of that a little bit more in terms of what it relates to for those particular clients. And if it is simply around that inability because of the technology, or is it because there's fundamental reasons why they're not eligible for the badge? Age in itself does not mean that somebody automatically has eligibility. And I think on the point of eligibility for members, it's really important that the council has a key understanding and promotes absolutely what the Department for Transport expects in ensuring that only people who are eligible have a badge. Now, that's to make sure that the people who are eligible get them, and that the system is not taken advantage of or in some cases fraudulently used. We do deal with fraudulent applications and fraudulent use. So getting it right at the front end is really important. And for those people who absolutely are eligible and deserve a badge, actually have that access and ability to gain it. And that's why the checks and balances that the system puts in place and that we actually require of applicants is very important. Sort of moving on to some of the other bits that weren't sort of specifically drawn out at the start but are in the report, around assessing eligibility and trying to make that easier. So, for example, the mobility assessments, which were very much, before COVID, and the ability to actually get those assessments undertaken by people who've got the right expertise and can give us that independent assessments. Our NH colleagues are under a significant amount of pressure to do that. And the sort of move has been around getting applicants to come forward with evidence from their GPs and other sources. It's not just about getting information from general practitioners, because they have a right to that information under GDPR. They can ask their GP for that information, and the GPs are required to provide it. If the council asks for it, we do not have that direct right, because we are a third party. The numbers that we're actually getting across, I think, according to the team, it's not going to inundate a GP surgery for that information. Over the last couple of years, we're now down to 63 outstanding as a result of the backlog with the pandemic. Those assessments restarted, and they're already chipping away at the ones that are being done. Ludlow, Bridgnorth, Market Drayton and Whitchurch are all places where you can go to get these. But as I say, that we used to have in the region of several hundreds of these applications requiring that sort of assessment. We have tried to rebalance and help our NHS colleagues focus on the ones who cannot get the eligibility demonstrated other than through an actual physical assessment. And as I say, that has shifted the balance and helped to make that better going forward. There were slight concerns around the applications being cancelled in mid-process because information wasn't coming through. They remain on the system for 12 months. And if somebody starts an application but doesn't manage to get the data that or the supporting evidence they need, as soon as it does come in, within that period, the application is reopened and it would proceed as normal. I think that's probably enough for me at the moment. I'm happily take any further questions, but that sort of gives a a brief consideration of it from the current perspective of the council.
I think from my perspective, Francis, members can correct me. It just feels like there's a mismatch somewhere here between what we're getting the one side and what's on the service side. I'm not sure it's something that the committee itself could consider at this meeting now and make a judgment as such on. I think probably what I'd say is there an opportunity for officers and a representative from Age UK or whether they want me there, that's fine, just to meet, maybe take that through, take a couple of case examples and just see where this disconnect is existing, and just, I don't know, Robert, if that's something that would be of use to yourselves. It does just feel like that whilst there is an answer, and I take your point, Francis, I mean, I'm just looking at some things and I'm sort of the digital by default bit in my head. I mean, the government defines what digital by default is. It says digital services are so straightforward and convenient that all those who can use digital services will choose to do so, while those who can't are not excluded. And I'm just I'm sitting here and I'm looking at what's been submitted and so on. I think it's hard for us as a committee to sit here at this meeting and sort of sit in judgment. I just feel like there's probably a bit of work to be done, and probably between yourselves and Age UK directly, if that makes sense. And then to come back, if we can ask you to come back, obviously we've put you on the spot today, asking you to give a verbal response to the concerns that have been raised, but I'm just thinking, do we want to ask Francis to go away, work with Age UK, invite Age UK to come back, and we get a report back from Francis to the next meeting once you've had a chance to do that? And then, Robert, it gives yourselves a chance and the applicants a chance to come back and do it, but it's sort of instructing, can we have that direct contact to try and get this sort of mismatch between the two bits looked at? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, as I say, I do feel that you know, we have professional and collaborative relationships with many council departments. It just feels like this particular circumstance, it's not been that way. It just feels a little bit, which is why we've come to take it scrutiny, as I say. And obviously the blue badge application process is broad and somewhat complicated. Try to succinctly summarise the sorts of issues on the paper, and I'm welcome to take any questions members have about that. But yeah, and we've also suggested some practical ways that we could take things forward. So I would welcome that operational conversation myself, around those sort of bulleted points we put on page 2 of the paper, really.
Okay. I mean, as I say, I'm happy to attend to sit and I can report back to the members of this committee as well about if there is a meeting, if that's helpful. But if not, if it's better to have a direct conversation. But I just think, yeah, as we sit here today, we can't offer a judgment on it. It's for Francis running the service to come back, but we can ask, can those meetings take place, and then a report come back to us about how we can address them, or as you say, the suggestions being made, if you've considered them, and what we look at. It's just about trying to find it feels like one of those, it just needs a practical solution somewhere. And as you say, Francis, whether it's a misunderstanding or whether it's a direct, or there needs to be something just tweaked about the communications and the working, then yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Chair, I'm more than happy to do that. Just so that people are, you know, we have had conversations already. So I'm sorry if it's felt that we've not been particularly helpful. But you know, we have done what we think in terms of making that inequality issue as best we can. But more than happy to take away and actually have a direct sort of face-to-face conversation around the sort of bullet points that are on that list. I think some of them have sort of, I think the final one I've answered already, that the mobility assessments have already restarted. So that's one that can be you know, taken now, and it's already started to chip away at the number that was outstanding. And in respect of the others, yeah, we can have that face-to-face conversation. I'll set that up after this meeting.
Yeah, that's okay, Ruth. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to have a bit of a moan, really, because Age UK has put this paper together. They raised these issues 6 months ago. Francis, with all due respect, you mentioned that you knew about these issues pre-COVID, and that's exactly 2 years ago today when we went into lockdown. And yet here we are with still people being disengaged because they are not able to access the application process through digital by default. And there are people who have been isolated anyway through COVID and can potentially continue to remain isolated because they don't have a blue badge to aid their ability to access the community. I mean, I'm not particularly happy that there isn't a covering paper set of bullet points from Age UK around what has been done and what could be done. So I do think this needs to be addressed very quickly, and there should be a report both back to this committee and people scrutiny as soon as possible, because Age UK quite rightly have highlighted that older people are more disenfranchised through this process, but younger adults also have to apply through a digital application process, and including children, and that should be considered by people scrutiny.
I think, and I'll bring Daniel in, but I think that's where what I'm proposing is that this gives it a good chance of, you've raised it publicly, we've noted it, we do take note of the concerns and so on, and that we want something back, and that gives Francis the opportunity to come back with a report setting out what we are doing to address it, to try and resolve it. But Daniel?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify here, actually, there is no report here from councillors' officers. That's because no report was asked for. I didn't ask Francis to produce a report for this, so the lack of report is on me and nobody else.
I think but this gives a way to try and make some practical headway, as you say, in a quick manner, and then we bring it back. And as you say, Francis, it's got that opportunity then to put that into the report to say this is how we've addressed. Hopefully, as we say, if there's a disconnect at the moment, it's just trying to get that a bit connected up, because as you say, people are applying now for their badges and so on. So yeah. Okay. Are we happy with that as a plan of action for that one? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Francis. Thank you,
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
The work programme you've had circulated to you, which I think, if anybody's got any comment on that, and where again you've got a lot of substitutes, so it's a hard one to comment on. The only thing that at the moment dropped off it, and Daniel, I'll come to you in a second, and you can introduce. The only one I was conscious of maybe not dropping off this year's, but it'll drop into next year's, was we had an item on working how Shropshire Council works with town and parish councils. And I think it should be on there, but I'm fully accepting that it will probably drop into next year in terms of actual meetings and so on. But I'm just thinking there's going to be a fair bit of groundwork in establishing it's such a wide topic that I'm thinking there probably is going to have to be some conversations, or some members are interested in looking at specifics of where we go with it ahead of being ready to bring it to a meeting, etc. So that was the only one. But Daniel?
I just wanted to say as well, Chair, and I've noticed that, and I'll place that back on the long list for you. Yeah. But the committee has moved into two quite meaty areas of the council's work here. One is around housing, and one is around economic growth, and obviously those two issues are quite intimately linked. And looking at your long list here, housing features repeatedly. So I would suggest, if this committee is going to continue to have these two areas in its remit, the committee perhaps should spend a little bit of time outside of a formal committee meeting identifying its priorities for those two pieces of work. Otherwise, there's a risk that the committee just gets thrown lots of bits and bobs every now and then doesn't look at everything strategically in the first instance. So my recommendation is that to start the new municipal year, this committee holds a private session for a few hours with some senior officers to work through the Shropshire plan, to work through the allied data on that, to identify priorities going forward in terms of strategy and policy, so your work isn't wasted.
Everyone happy with that? We'll have informal meeting, look at the work programme, look what else and so on. Yeah. Okay. Right, agreed. Date and time of next meeting, we've got the next meeting scheduled for the 4th of May at 10 AM. So other than that, I'll close the meeting and thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think I just made it. That's fine.